Hello, welcome. Happy Tuesday to everybody. The weather's finally starting to turn, getting quite warm. I was at my son's baseball practice last night and it was hot out there. It was really hot. I was sweating. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the warmer weather. We're gonna do our usual wait about a minute or so, and then we'll get kicked off here. Very excited about today's webinar, Unlocking Your Financial Future, Power of Comprehensive Financial Planning, something that we've emphasized for many, many years now. And, we hired Sandra Terronez, who's a member of our team now over a year. And that's all she basically does is the planning and making the planning process even better than it was before. So, this is going to give you a glimpse into kind of how we think about planning. And as always, we welcome your questions. So real quick, and couple housekeeping items, then we'll jump into the presentation. If you can hear my voice, see my screen, and see me, if you could just do a thumbs up or a raise hand you can do, that would be great. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. And then if you have a question, what we'll do is you can input that into where the Q&A box is at the bottom of your screen. You click on that, you type in your question. If you don't want your name to show up, you'll check on anonymous. Otherwise, it will show your name. And we will make time at the end to address all of your questions. And if we don't have time, we'll follow up afterwards and make sure your question gets addressed. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And what we're going to do first is actually go through Unlocking Financial Freedom, the Power of Comprehensive Planning. Like any webinar we do, we have to cover some disclosures. The biggest point of the disclosures is just to reinforce the fact that this is not legal advice. We're not CPAs, okay? And any mention of performance, which there is none, it again is not indicative of anything that is going to happen in the future. So please read through this. If you have questions, you can direct it to me, but this is for informational purposes only. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to talk about just the importance of actually setting goals. Next, we'll go into the different elements and the evolving elements of a comprehensive financial plan. We'll talk about what's called scenario analysis, stress testing of a plan. We will actually look through a sample hypothetical plan, made up people, made up numbers, but to give you a sense as to kind of the different moving parts and how we look at plans. Then we'll go into kind of seeing the forest through the trees, how your plan evolves with your life situation. This is not a one and done type thing. And then we'll end with peace of mind and true wealth. So the importance of goal setting. A lot of people, there's a lot of literature out there on goals and the importance of goals, but I think it has to be done the right way. There are two doctors that spearheaded this research, and they came up with an acronym called the SMART criteria, right? Goals should be specific, they should be measurable, achievable, relevant, and time constrained. And if you can hit all of those metrics, you're much more likely to achieve the goal, and it's a much more effective strategy. So what do goals do, right? They give you direction and focus, right? A clear roadmap to follow. Motivation, right? So if you have a goal and you feel like it's achievable and you have a time frame, you're going to be more motivated to take action and persist in that action until that goal is complete. Having a goal allows you to measure your progress, right? Something like if you want to, run a certain distance, well, you might not start being able to run 3 miles at a time, but the first, month, you might get up to half a mile, then a mile, but you can measure it so you can see where you are along the continuum to get to your goal. Goal setting allows for prioritization, right? You ensure the most important goals are emphasized first, and the less important goals, while still there, they're not as prioritized. And it helps to inform your decision making, right? If you have the big picture, if you know what you're trying to achieve, you can make decisions more based on rationality versus emotion, right? You're less reactive to a day-to-day thing because you have a blueprint and a roadmap of where you're going. So what are the different elements of a financial plan? And these are a lot of them. This is, I mean, it could be more than this, right? It really is an indefinite number because there's so many different permutations on what someone's life can look like. But the way we like to think of it, again, this is dynamic. This is not static. But here are all the different pieces of a financial plan, right? You have estate planning, goal planning, like we talked about, specific goals, second home, sending my kids to a particular college, financial independence at a certain age, right? Really specific, retirement, cash flow and debt management, tax planning, investment planning, and asset allocation, education planning, right? Sending my kids to private school, sending my kids to college, graduate school potentially, risk management, right? More of a foundational piece of your plan, and then charitable planning. And there's more than this. And then in the middle, you can kind of see the dynamism of the plan over time, right? Every client has their own, what we call kind of your risk DNA, right? Your natural risk tolerance. Some people's tolerance for risk is high, other people's tolerance for risk is lower. You have, what stage of life is the client in? What's the macroeconomic environment? And then the monitoring and assessment on an ongoing basis. And what you'll find is a lot of these things can interact, right? As someone enters a new life stage, their risk tolerance, their risk DNA could decrease. And if that's happening at the same time that the macroeconomic environment's changing, such as interest rates being at 5 versus 0, well, that could then inform, for example, a change in the investment strategy to one of, hey, we can now get a 10-year treasury at 4.7% per year. Before we were getting 2. This makes a lot of sense based on your change in risk tolerance, moving to retirement, the change in the macro environment. And that, just to give you a taste, can then impact tax planning, right? Depending on where those changes are being made, right? The increased interest could affect your tax situation, your tax bracket. Maybe municipal bonds are needed. So there's all sorts of implications, and every move has an effect on some other part of planning in general. And where you can really have profound impacts, where we have profound impacts on a client's life, is when we are able to check off multiple boxes, okay, multiple parts of a plan with one action, right? So a Roth conversion, for example, might check off a box on tax planning. It could help on retirement withdrawals. It helps on estate planning, right? So that's a really powerful thing when you can take one strategic action and it impacts multiple levels within your plan. So what is scenario analysis? So what we always start with what we could talk about as a base plan, a base financial plan. And that is going to consider all of your income sources, your expenses, your taxes, deductions directly from your paycheck or your payroll, any debt you have, real assets you own, like real estate, other property, investment balances, and your asset allocation within different accounts, estate documents, insurance, and we got to pull it all in. And then we actually kind of model and project that out, not just for the next couple of years, but all the way through the rest of your life. And it's iterative because so much changes each year, every 2 years, that we have to come back and revisit it. But what's nice is when we project it out, we know, okay, at retirement, some income sources are going to stop. Other income sources might start. Expenses and taxes likely are going to change. You're not going to have as much in payroll deductions, right? So by understanding the dynamics of what a retirement landscape looks like, it's going to naturally feed into the plan because some income sources will change, some expenses will change. Most people, I would say, have multiple goals. and they want to understand how, well, if I emphasize this goal, like this is the most important goal, how does that affect my other goals? So scenario analysis, what we're doing is we're taking that base plan and then we're changing either a goal or an assumption to simulate other scenarios so that you can get a sense as to different ways your road can go. So, right, if let's say we have a base plan, we're going to look at this in a second, with the retirement at 65. Well, scenario A might model retiring full-time at 62 and then working part-time until 67. And the question is, what effect does that have on the plan success rate? Maybe a client wants to buy a vacation home or a second home in retirement. Is that achievable? Perhaps they want to know the maximum amount of spending they can afford. Say, look, the kids are fine. We're not worried about them. We want to enjoy the fruits of our labor and do as much travel as great. We can back into that and say, if you want to do that and you're not that worried about leaving much behind, we can say, let's assume we want a 95% success rate or 100% success rate. What's the most you can spend every year? And we can back into that. And any other, I mean, there's really an infinite number of potential scenarios we can look at, depending on what your goals are and what your concerns are and your objectives. So we're in a minute here going to pivot to a plan of Frank and Joanna Miller. I'm just giving you a little preview. Again, it's all made up. These are not real people. All the accountants' assets are made up just for illustrative purposes. But we're going to go through briefly parts of the plan so you can get a sense as to how what we're talking about in this presentation actually feeds into the planning process for a client. So after we run the scenarios, we also need to stress test the plan, right? So we know that there's one thing is for certain, is that you have to expect the unexpected when it comes to the execution of your plan, right? A tragic type of event like a death or a disability or a terminal illness can all derail an otherwise solid plan, right? And the question we always ask clients, and the way we look at it frame is we don't know when something's going to happen. And so we have to draw a line in the sand over the next year to say, if someone dies or is disabled in the next year, what happens to the plan? Can it sustain itself? Is there enough insurance, right? A part of stress testing is also estate planning. So we have to include and make sure the documents are in place so that if you can no longer make decisions for yourself or are unable to manage money anymore, that you already have the documents in place that are going to say, here's who steps in and handles it. They're aware of it. And oh, by the way, if something happens to me and I go poof, here's where these assets are going to be directed to, whether it's a trust or an individual. And it's one of those things where, it's the most often procrastinated part of financial planning. When clients come to us, very rarely have they already done their estate planning. Occasionally they have, and that's great, but normally they haven't, because it's such an easy thing to kind of, kick down the road. The problem is if something happens, it's then too late, right? If someone all of a sudden becomes severely disabled or passes away quickly and unexpectedly, if those documents aren't in place, it's too late. So it's one of those things we view kind of the risk management, insurance, and estate planning as the foundation of the financial planning house, right? Above that, it's maintaining a good budget, cash flow, savings, and investment, right? That's kind of the next level. If you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is like food and shelter, right? This is social connections, one step up. Above that is more aspirational things, goals like retirement, purchasing a new or bigger home, a more expensive home, a certain college. And then above that is where you're at a level of prosperity, right? That's where you have the time to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, the way you want to do it. And you don't have to answer to anybody. Okay. That's for many people, the crown jewel. So what we're going to do here before we jump is I'm going to go to the financial plan here. Now, I just want to make sure, can everyone see this? Can everyone see the plan here? Can everyone see my screen? because I made a transition. I just want to make sure. I'm going to assume if I don't hear anything that we're good to go. But basically, you should see Frank and Joanna Miller at the top. These clients, again, totally made up. Frank, let's say, is an attorney. Joanna works in a hospital. They are on the tail end of having the kids in the house. One kid's out. The other two are about to go to college or finishing college. And they're looking at retirement kind of right on the horizon in the next 4 to 5 years. So Frank is 60, Joanna is 58. They have 3 children, Peter, Mary Beth, and Lucas, 26. So he's out, 22, 21. So they're in college. And then they also wanted to look at or make sure they have the ability to potentially help their moms who are still alive, who are 86 and 84. We have them retiring in the base case at 65 and living to 95. Their major goals, again, are to retire at 65, and other than not including mortgage or property taxes, just in terms of living expenses, they want to be able to maintain a spending level of $133,000 in today's dollars for their entire life. Mary Beth is going to need $50,000 for college from 2020 to 2023, and Lucas 50 from 22 to 25. It is not a huge priority of theirs to have money left over to the next generation. They have a very solid net worth. They have an emergency fund of $40,000. They have non-retirement assets of about $1 million. And then Frank has a big 401k. He's been with the law firm a long time, $2.5 million. Joanna's hospital 403b of $143,000. And then she previously converted about $100,000 to a Roth. And then Frank also has coverage through his work and a whole life policy. They have a $1.2 million home with a $500K mortgage on it, and then a vacation home that's debt-free. Okay. Frank makes $350,000. Joanna has part-time earnings of $48,000. Here's expected Social Security amounts at $70 for Frank, $65 for Joanna, and then she gets a pension from the hospital as well at $65. We talked a little bit about this. Their expenses in retirement are going to be $133,000. When the idea here is at age 90 or 85, even they've slowed down, so the expenses reduced a little bit. That's generally pretty common in retirement, unless there's some major health event, and then it can spike up. You can see the mortgage on the home is pretty sizable, about $4,000 a month, and then you have college, and you have all these insurance premiums. So they're spending a good amount of money. And you would think with those assets, we're going to kind of jump into the plan here, the output, that the plan would look pretty solid, right? So this is kind of the software. Let's see, let me take this off for a sec. This is just the base case, right? So when you look at this, and a lot of these online calculators, this is what it would show. And a lot of people would think, oh, okay, I'm in good shape. Like, I'm retiring with $4 million. It kind of stays up and level for most retirement, and then I end with about 4. Now, a couple things. It's assuming a 3% inflation rate on living expenses here, and a rate of return every year of 4.73%. So not crazy. But when we look under the hood a little, the plan, it's not bad, but it's not as solid as this makes it look. And here's one way to look at that, right? This is all in future dollars. So this is what, if you don't adjust for inflation, what the portfolio value will feel like or look like, in those years, right? But what's it actually going to feel like in those years? And that we have to adjust to present value. And the reason that's important is because that's their actual purchasing power over time, right? So at retirement, they have purchasing power about 4.2 million, not including any real estate. 20 years into retirement, in 2047, it's at 2.8 million in today's dollars. So they're still okay, but not nearly as good as what we initially looked at. So now what we're going to do, right? We made the assumption that the return rate is 4.73% per year. what we do, and this is part of the stress testing of the plan, is we run what's called a Monte Carlo analysis. And what that does is says, look, let's assume you both live to 95, but we don't know what the macroeconomic environment, what trajectory it's going to follow over the next 30 years. We don't know what the market return trajectory is going to be over the next 30 years. And so let's randomize through 1,000 different trials, various rates of various trials with different market conditions, some returns being high early in retirement, some returns being low. We're randomizing it. Now, it's still going to have an average of 4.73% over that time frame, but you're going to have very different outcomes depending on what the sequence of returns looks like. So the key here is what percent of the 1,000 trials, what percentage of the time was there money left at the end, right? And you can kind of see here, this is top 20%, right? Above average market, and then the yellow, orange is a below average market. And the probability of success for the plan as it currently stands is 76%. So that's, again, that's not bad, that's solid, but we really like it to be above 82%, ideally closer to 90 and above, right? And the reason is because when you're retired, there is some control over you have on maybe reducing spending, but it can be hard, right? You don't have the flexibility to go get a job and, you know, earn more income, right? So we want to make sure there's plenty of margin of safety. So when we're looking at something like this, again, we'd say, look, plan is strong, but really we'd want it to be a little bit stronger. So what could we do? Well, let's say they say, you know, we've had that vacation home for a long time. We want to enjoy it, you know, for the next few years, you know, next 8 years. But beyond that, we really would rather travel around the world as opposed to, you know, focus on just going to our vacation home. So if we just change that, it's probably not going to make a huge difference. But what it's doing is it's bringing the assets from the vacation home into something that is spendable. So it actually did, yeah. So that's dramatic, right? So just selling a second property, it reduces expenses because you don't have property taxes, the maintenance with it, and it takes the equity in that home and makes it investable and spendable, right? It's another income source. So just doing that, if they said, look, we don't want to work longer, we need to be out at 65, okay, but in order to get the plan lower sell, would you be open to, you know, divesting of the vacation home at 2032? Yes, okay, and boom, there's your success rate. Now let's take that off and say, they say, no, you know, I'm okay working. Why don't we say we're going to work a couple more, or excuse me, well, I'll retire at 65 full-time, but I'll do part-time consulting for 2 years and make 100,000 a year. Okay. And a slight adjustment in living expenses. Okay. Very slight. And again, similarly, it increases the plan to 85%. Now we can look and say, well, if we're willing to do this and we're willing to sell the vacation home, what effect does that have on the plan? Now it goes up to 91%. And you said, you know what? That's well within our confidence interval. What if we also wanted to take special vacations of 30,000 a year until age 75? Again, these are all things we've created, but this is exactly what it looks like. So then it does drop down to 83, but it's still well above that 76% and gives them a lot of flexibility. So this is a flavor for both a combination of stress testing the plan, but also looking at different scenario analysis. And you can see how changing one thing really does change others. And we can, you know, to further stress this, we could say, look, what if Frank passed away in the next year or two, right? What happens? Actually, the plan is fairly solid because he has pretty good life insurance and it's all tax-free. Part of the reason that this plan has issues, if we look at it, we'll show you here. Part of the reason this plan has issues is the first few years of retirement. So I'm going to just bear with me here for a sec. So he retires in 2028. Okay, now look what's happening. The taxable investments, because they're much more efficient than retirement accounts in terms of when you draw money out, there's a lot less taxes you pay. This is getting spent down first. Okay, and as a result, the withdrawal rate actually stays below 4%. But when this exhausts itself, starting in 2034 or 2035, that runs out. Now, right, this client, if they don't want to sell the vacation home, has to pull everything from their retirement accounts. So what happens is, look at the taxes. They go from basically nothing, right, or very minimal, to 24, then to 50,000. Okay. And that is fairly common. It just, people don't, it's not really explained early on when people are stuffing money into these plans, that when you take it out, especially if you've saved well, it can be kind of a big drag in retirement, because to get $1 out, you got to take $1.30 or $1.30 plus out. So anyway, that was kind of the primary issue with this plan, and we wanted to show that. So I'm going to switch back now. So we talked about stress testing the plan. So I think, kind of what the planning does is, rather than being on the street level or looking at things kind of day to day, minute to minute, it allows you to get that bird's eye, multi-thousand-foot view from above, right? And that's where we come in. And seeing the forest through the trees, I think, is a good analogy, because it is so easy, especially when you're looking at your own finances, you're dealing with your own family, your own money. It's emotional, and it can be really hard to think clearly and not be reactive with regard to your money in terms of reaching your goals. So what we're trying to help people understand is that every component of the planning process, it's interconnected, and you change one area and it can impact other areas. So it's easy to get focused on these short-term outcomes or the details, and you lose sight of the bigger picture. So as an example, with retirement planning, all of a sudden, when you're no longer working, you're sitting in front of your screen and you're seeing your portfolio go up and down day to day. And it's, in dollar terms, big moves. 1% move on $1 million portfolio is $10,000. Without context, that's scary for a lot of people, right? But if we have a broader view, right, we're zooming out and we understand what role cash reserves play. How are your investments allocated, right? Yes, overall it was down, might be down 1%, but were there parts of the portfolio that were either up, or even with that volatility, it's going to produce this much income? How about Social Security, pensions, other retirement vehicles, right? Putting all of that together into one, so it can guide better decisions about withdrawal strategies, asset allocation, and the timing of your retirement. The example that came to mind to me was retiring after a 25% market decline. Incredibly difficult psychologically, right? People who are retiring at the end of 2022, really tough. But it's actually not all necessarily bad. If you're watching the news, the worst thing you could do, and most people would just say, I'm going to hold on to my job, right? But from a forward return and risk perspective, it can actually produce some of the best outcomes in retirement. The people who were able to retire at the end of 2008 into 2009 have had kind of an incredible ride, because returns have been so good in stocks over the last 15 years. And then over prioritizing one financial goal can often come at the expense of another due to limited resources, right? People sometimes may hear a podcast or read a book. I know there are certain talking heads out there that are very passionate about approaching the finances a certain way, one way, and that's it. And I would just say, an example would be, pay down your debt as aggressively as possible before you do anything else, right? All excess cash flows, you go to paying down debt. Well, if you do that, it may be fine, but it could also result in you actually having to work longer, or not having enough for college savings, or possibly having less liquid investments to meet other financial goals. Because when you're paying down debt, for example, your mortgage, right, the only way to actually get that money out is to borrow against it or to sell the house. So that is not a liquid investment. And if you're ultimately borrowing at a later point in time, rates could actually be higher than when you're paying it down. I mean, that's been the case, frankly, the situation that people are in now. If they need to borrow or take a line of credit, it's at 6, 7, 8% that they're having to pay. So, right, if we over prioritize one goal, it will have a ripple effect on other parts of your plan. And that's why things have to be looked at comprehensively and prioritize, and make sure your goals are prioritized so that we can put the right strategy in place. We talked about how this is the planning is a process. It's not a one and done. So the plan will always evolve with your life situation. When you're starting out, you have a young family, maybe you're just married, your goals, your objectives, the way you look at life is totally different than when you're near retirement, right? So you might be saving for a home down payment, contributing to your retirement plans. Your asset allocation is focused on growth and accumulation for the long term. So you're heavy in stocks. You're trying to manage a budget and set goals for your family, saving for college. You want to make sure your family's protected if you were to die unexpectedly or become disabled. Want to make sure you have an emergency reserve in the event of a job loss. A plan for someone looking at retirement is going to look totally different, right? I mean, right here off the bat, Medicare and Social Security are a huge part of retirement planning. Withdrawal rates, right? Rather than you're in the accumulation phase, you're now in the conservation and distribution phase, right? So where do we want to take money out from first? What do we want to sell? Should the asset allocation be focused more on income and capital preservation, or is the client still okay having more of a growth tilt? It depends on everyone. Maybe someone wants to relocate or downsize using equity in their home to lower their expenses or eliminate debt. Legacy planning becomes a lot more important because people are starting to see, I'm in the last chapter of my life and I want to make sure everything flows the way I want it to the next generation. And then you have to think about things like a long-term care event and what impact that could have on the spouse, on the finances, who's going to make decisions. If you're the one managing the money and something happens to you, who's going to step in and help with that? Who's going to pay the bills? All those things have to be thought through. Okay, so you may remember, if you ever took psychology class, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It starts at kind of a very basic level, and at the pinnacle, it's self-actualization, where not only do you have a very established sense of self and feel fulfilled and have peace of mind, but you're also kind of extending and helping others to bring them up to that level as well. And how do you ascribe a value to peace of mind, right? For everyone, it's going to be different. I would say, and from our experience and the way we approach this, peace of mind with your finances is more of a direction, a process than a destination, right? So it does require kind of ongoing attention, adaptation, and management. So this is kind of our Maslow's hierarchy of needs as it relates to financial planning, right? At the lowest level, and people do, a lot of people out there struggle with this lowest level, sadly. Being able to pay your bills, having your basic needs met, having a stable cash flow from a job. Once those are met, emergency savings, making sure you have health insurance in the event, God forbid, you get sick or ill. If you don't have health insurance, that alone could that could collapse the plan. Life insurance, disability insurance, property insurance. And then above that is more longer term savings and investments, right? You're paying down your mortgage debt, you're saving for retirement, you're saving for your kids' college. Above that is more aspirational goals, right? Thinking about legacy, philanthropy, financial independence, time as kind of the most important asset. And I think once you've kind of met that, above that, you're looking at things like peace of mind, fulfillment, right? Kind of the highest level, right? We have clients who have more money than they'll ever need. But for psychological reasons, they kind of get stuck in here. And even though they have more money than they'll ever need, they have trouble reaching that state of peace of mind to know, yeah, I can spend money on this and I'm not going to be stressed by it. Some people, it's kind of just wired into their DNA. But what we try to help with, and this is kind of part financial planning, part therapy, is getting them to a place where they're okay giving their kids money for a down payment on a home, or taking the family on a big trip for the first years of retirement, or building that dream house, whatever it is. I think having the confidence to do those things and know, with a very high degree of certainty you're going to be okay. That to me is where not only you have peace of mind, but you start to get into that level of what I call kind of true wealth. I mean, it's used throughout the industry, but this is the pinnacle, right? Because this is not just the financial side, but it's all aspects of a person's well-being. And it's the idea that wealth isn't just about the money you have, but it's about the richest of your life as a whole. There can be people who on paper are worth a ton of money. I know some people who they're incredibly successful, make a ton of money, could get out now, but they can't stop working and they have almost no time because they're always working. Look, on paper, it's very impressive, but to me, what's most impressive is true wealth, where you have physical and mental wellness, you have strong relationships and social connections, you have a balance between your career and your personal life, you have a sense of purpose, right? What is kind of why are you here, right? Why are you here on earth? Financial security, right? Not merely the accumulation of money, having the freedom to make choices that allow one to live a life aligned with one's values. And I think that goes right into the time piece, right? The ultimate wealth is having the freedom to choose how to spend your time, to do what you want with your time, and to not have to be accountable, to really anyone, right? You don't want to do something, say, nope, I'm not going to do it. They're not paying you, or if they are paying you, you don't need the money because you have enough on your own. And then legacy, right? No one lives forever. So, what do you leave behind in terms of not just your wealth to your family or to a charity, but your impact on society, memories with loved ones, right? So financial peace, I think, is part of this broader, even broader dynamic pursuit. And it's a journey, right? It is a process and a journey. And you're trying to get a balanced life where financial decisions are in harmony with your personal values, your goals, and contribute to your overall well-being rather than just, hey, I have that much more money, or that much more money. So it's really hard because you spend most of your life trying to save every penny because it's hard to build wealth. And then all of a sudden you have to kind of kick the ladder away at the end and say, okay, well, now I'm here. I need to change my perspective. And, not everyone can do that last part, but we try to help get people there. So, again, just the disclosures that we talked about at the beginning. Are there, I realize this was a little bit of a different type of webinar than we normally do, but are there any questions that you have on comprehensive planning, its role in building wealth, maintaining wealth, achieving goals? Hopefully you can see the value of it. But we really, yes, the asset management, investment management is very important, but it has to fit into this broader framework, right? If it doesn't fit into this broader framework, I think it's not nearly as impactful as it could be. And you're not making nearly the difference in a client's life if you're just looking at the investments, which our industry is moving more and more in this direction, but we're not where we need to be. We need to be much better, in my opinion. And we're continuing to invest to get better in this area as well. I'm just going to this so that we have kind of a template here. Any questions, Jeff?
No questions as of right now.
Okay. And that's fine. Look, not everyone's going to have a question. This isn't like a social security topic where it's necessarily going to lead to kind of questions that come about. And a lot of this, as you know, right, a lot of you have been through the process, so you know firsthand what it does, what it feels like. And again, one question that we do get, looks like one just came in, is like, how often do I have to look at that? How often? I would say every year, once a year is a really good cadence. There are going to be times in your life, whether it's near retirement, losing somebody, a loved one, a parent, a major, your child's going to college and you're trying to, where you're going to need maybe 2 or 3 check-ins, or maybe it's one full check-in and then, hey, it's a call that we have, but it has to be ongoing, right? I think we're kind of that, a little bit of a nudge that's trying to get in front of you every year to just stay on top of this, because every year things change. Something is changing, whether it's in your life, the macroeconomic environment, risk tolerance can change, goals can change, investment markets change. So taxes change, policy changes, all those things. All right, looks like we have a question now, Jeff.
Yep, we got 2 questions, actually. The first one is one we get quite often is there any asset minimum that's required for financial planning to be useful? In other words, is this something you can only start when you amassed a certain amount of money in your 401k, or should you be doing it sooner when you're young, or what's your take?
Very good question. I think for the type of planning we're talking about, it generally would be more useful once people are a little bit established versus like just starting out. But I do think that even if you're just finishing college, having a basic understanding of personal finance and basic financial planning is incredibly valuable. And that could be as simple as, I'm going to build 3 months worth of my expenses, my monthly expenses, and put it in a cash reserve account. I'm going to take advantage of my employer benefits, right? To the extent that they offer health insurance, group term, things like that. And if they offer a match on my 401k, I'm going to do at least enough to get the match. And I think within a couple years after you've done that, I think then you are ready for kind of a more official approach where you're engaging with the professional and you're building out the plan and the goals. But I think as a base case, you could start a plan being younger, especially if your income coming out of school is high. But I would say kind of for most people, that's going to be a really good starting point, but it really depends.
Another question, can I update my plan, or does updating it require 4J to help?
So you, in terms of updating your plan, you certainly can update it. Parts of it, like you can update your balances, and Jeff, help me here, because I know you and Sandra work more on that end, but like if a client wants to go in and update a 401k balance, an investment account balance, they're able to do that, correct?
That's right. Yeah. And if you can't, for whatever reason, just let us know. It's a setting issue and we can just allow it, allow that.
Yeah. So I would say, yes, we can allow it. And if you want to play around, that's doable. But I would say be cautious, right? Because we have a lot of inputs in the plan. So if you're making tons of changes, it can kind of impact how we're working with you. So some stuff you can update on your own, but I would always encourage you to get in touch with us. But you can view, if you log into your site, you can view any report, cash flow, net worth, Monte Carlo, that's all available to you to view that. If you also update the balances, that'll be more accurate. The only thing that might be harder is like if you say, well, I want to move my retirement up and I want to decrease expenses, then we may need to make some of those changes for you. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, that's correct. And I would just say, just shoot us an email if and when you do that, just to make sure we're not double counting any assets or things are coded correctly, like to Josh's point about the tax planning, if you put in your 401k, but it's coded as a non-retirement asset, it's not going to account for the taxes correctly in retirement. It'd be kind of erroneous and give you, garbage in, garbage out sort of thing. So let us take another look at it after you've made
Yeah,
this change.
we're always available to kind of tweak your plan, or if you want to talk about, hey, I want to look at these things. But I mean, part of the reason you're working with us is because you're paying us to do this for you. So doing it on your own in this framework where we're kind of sitting on top as the advisor, there is some leeway there, but it can be a little bit challenging. But I would say if you're trying to do it on your own on another site, I think you do have to be very cautious, right? There's just a little change in an assumption can have a really big impact in the planning result. And if you're not really confident what you're looking at, I think it can lead to, potentially a false sense of confidence or fear that you don't necessarily need to have.
All right, last one in the queue so far. How, if at all, do you change the analysis as asset values increase?
Yeah. So what we've done in terms of changing the analysis has really been more so far on the inflation side, right? So obviously we're in a different inflation regime than we were pre-COVID. So it's kind of a new world, at least going back over the last 15, 16 years. Obviously many people lived through the 70s and 80s with much higher levels of inflation. So we have increased the rate of inflation on living expenses or on the expenses that flow through a client's plan up to 3% per year. And we used to have it at like 2.5. On the return side, what we do, I think we're pretty conservative on this front, but what we actually do is take a return, I think that's kind of on the low end of a reasonable range. So we use 4.73%, which the reason I think that that's reasonable is you can get a 10-year treasury for 4.73% right now. And stocks historically have returned, really 10% per year, not every year by any means, but on average. So to me, I think we're using kind of the bottom end of that. And the reason for that is we don't want a high rate, your plan to be dependent on a high rate of return. I think a lot of advisors out there, from what I've heard at industry meetings, et cetera, is they'll use 6%. And the reason they use 6% is because if you look at kind of a balanced portfolio over a long period of time, that's been a pretty reasonable return rate, like 6 to 7% per year. And the issue I have with that is that, yes, that may be true, but our experience has been that that's only true if the client holds through the down periods. And we don't know which clients are going to always be able to hold through those down periods. And when clients start to get more aggressive as the market's going up and get more risk averse when the market's going down, which is exactly the opposite of how we try to run the portfolios. But it's a very hard impulse to overcome. When they're doing that, that will lower the rate of return in the long term. It might prevent more downside in the short term, but in the long term, you're timing the market, and that's almost always a losing strategy. Because even people who got out in the fall of 08, after the first hit, but not the second, they didn't get back in time, because it's so hard to get back in when the world looks like it's broken. So look, it's tough, but I would say that's hopefully gives you some insight. I think we're more inclined to change with the macro environment on the inflation side But conversely, like in 2022, when things were down 20-25% intra-year, arguably we should have increased the return on the assets at that time. We didn't. We've been pretty static at that 4.73 because we, again, trying to view it, look at it over the long term and be fairly conservative. So long-winded answer, I know, but I wanted to give you our complete thought process there. And Jeff, if you have anything to add on that, I would, feel free. If not,
Yeah, the only thing I would add is something you already touched on, which is the Monte Carlo kind of,
yes,
when stocks are high, future expected returns, at least over a shorter period of time, might be lower. And when valuations are low, stocks are low, expected returns could be a little bit higher. Over time, if we're looking at 30, 40 years, they probably will trend to that 8 to 10% range that Josh mentioned. The other piece is that when we look at it through the lens of the Monte Carlo, that kind of helps to account for some of that uncertainty and variability and longer periods where stocks don't.
The Monte Carlo does factor in a lot of that variability. That's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. Okay, another question. Other firms offer planning, as well.
Yeah.
Why, why shouldn't they use those offerings as opposed to 4J? Or what, maybe said differently, is what do we do that is, really stands out?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I started my career with a firm attached to an insurance company, and the gentleman who did all the planning, in his mid-50s, and he was very old school. So I actually learned financial planning kind of what I would call the old school way, which is where you're really digging in and looking at cash flow and taxes and invest, like the whole picture, right? You're getting everything, you're fleshing out their goals. It takes time. And the way our industry has evolved is that the advisor is highly incentivized to get the assets in, to charge a fee on those assets, and that's how he or she gets paid. Okay, that's how the big firms incentivize, right? Bring the assets in. And because I grew up in that realm of, and it intuitively felt right to me. Like, how can you advise without knowing the full picture? And people don't need piecemeal advice. They need comprehensive advice. So part of it was just luck that I think I stumbled on this gentleman and met a team that kind of embraced that vision with Jeff and Jen and Sandra and Jamie. So we've been working this way for 15 years. And I would say there are firms out there who will do planning. There's a lot fewer firms out there that will do planning where they do it the way we do, which is we charge a fee, right? For a new client coming to us today, we charge a flat $3,000 for a comprehensive plan. And there's occasionally an exception if it's a family member, something like that, but we're pretty firm on that. There are firms out there that do that, not many. And the other difference I would say is many firms will send out, right? If you're meeting with Jeff or meeting with me, they'll get the information and then they'll send it to another department. They'll send it to the planning department and their hands are off of it and they are not looking at it until it comes to them the day before, and then they basically just regurgitate it. I think a huge thing that makes us different is that the people who you're going to be working with over the long term are also the people that are working on your plan on an ongoing basis. All of us are logging the e-money on a daily basis. Now, Sandra's spending the most amount of time because she's kind of the head of that department. And the other thing is that we're not just showing you reports, we actually type out the recommendations, right? Or whether it's in the agenda, like we're really sitting down and writing out, here's how to achieve your goals. Here's what we have to do. And then we show you that scenario in e-money. So I think you kind of put all that together and you have a firm that has done hundreds and hundreds of these plans comprehensively, where they've been paid and delivered something that they stand by, that if it's taken to an accountant or another planner, they can implement it with them. It's a team-based approach. And I think we all have invested a fair amount in our education, whether it's through the CFP, the CFA, the Chartered Financial Consultant designation. So you add all that up, and I'm sure there's firms out there that do it, but I would say it's probably on the rarer side, and very much when we have people that come to us and they're shopping around, they say, well, wait a minute, you guys are going to charge me this fee for a comprehensive plan, and this person will do it for free. And then I go in and I explain what they're going to get when it's done for free. That why they're getting it for free is because the only, I don't say the only, but the driving motivation is, look, I'm going to give this to you for free because I need you to move your assets over. Whereas if you're getting paid, if you're paying for a service, and that should be a standalone thing. Of course, there's a hope that you say, wow, you know everything. We want to continue to work with you. We want this relationship to be planning and investment management, but it's not a requirement because you're paying for the plan. So I think it's all those things. I like the question. It's a good question.
Yeah, and I think you touched on the last one, which is, there are firms out there like Vanguard where the planning they offer is free. Why not use that? Why not continue to use their offering? I think you kind of touched on this, but anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you'll see is if you looked at kind of the webinar that we did and we walked you through the planning scenario and the detail and ran the different scenarios. I have looked at the Fidelity one. I've looked at the Vanguard one. I haven't in a while, but it's not, one, I don't think there's that level of sophistication, but two, in my mind, it's if you're not trained in this field, right, and then you're trying to go in and make these changes, you can get a sense for sure, and some people might be able to figure out with a lot of time on a spreadsheet and research, but you don't know what you're looking at, right? It's kind of like trying to give an example. Like you could have I love tennis, right? I'm a tennis pro. I can literally stand there and watch a pro hit a certain shot and say, here's what you do, your hand, move it like that. And then they hit the ball to me and I do it, and it's a disaster. It's the same thing. It's just, we do this all day, every day. And I think when you're using a Vanguard site, you're saying, okay, I'm going to do this on my own, but you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think your best example of that is if you looked at this plan, the Miller plan in Vanguard, you would think you're good. Now, if they have a Monte Carlo and you went to the Monte Carlo, you would say, oh, well, it's not quite as good as I thought it was. It's only 76%. And then, okay, now what can we do to bring it from 76 up to 90 and still be in line with our goals? Like, maybe they have that capability. Vanguard, remember, Vanguard is a massive asset manager. So they only get paid if you purchase Vanguard funds. And that's fine. But they're just offering this as a way to kind of, I think, attract you to bring your funds there. But it's a totally different model, right? When you're going to Vanguard, you want to manage your own money, you want to do your own thing. And when you're coming to us, you want to focus on other things in life, and you realize that you might not know as much as you think you know, or you might realize you don't know, and you're like, I want to go give this to someone I trust.
That's a good answer. I think that's it for the questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. This was amazing. This was really great. I loved presenting this and putting it together, and the team's help was great. So if you have any questions, you know how to reach us. You can email us at info@4jwealth.com or any of our names, Josh, Jeff, Sandra, Jennifer at 4jwealth.com. And we will see you next month.